March Madness has arrived, and while we don't get a 64 team playoff in college football, we are going to take a look at what it might look like if that were the case. We are going to take a look at the matchups that will happen. We'll break down the matchups early on. We'll pick some matchups, and then when we get towards the Sweet 16, we are going to be using What If Sports. If you haven't used that, go check them out. Pretty cool simulator that can create games to show you what might happen between teams that didn't play last year or even in years previous. So let's take a look at what would happen if March Madness was in college football. We start in the South region. Marshall was a solid team last year, but they are not Georgia, so the Bulldogs are going to advance. Next, we have the Purdue Minnesota matchup, a game that Purdue won, and we will give Purdue credit for that. Also, they made it to the Big Ten championship game, so they will get the win over Minnesota. LSU and Maryland. Maryland was one of those teams that started off strong, kind of crashed at the end. LSU played really strong towards the end of the year. Tigers are going to get the win there. Oregon State and James Madison. This has upset potential. This is one of those games that you really like in March Madness. James Madison was one of the surprises of the season and of the Sun Belt, a team that was going to be plenty motivated if they made it to a 64 team playoff. Oregon State, typically one of those teams that is stubborn and won't go away. It's really tough to pick against the Beavers, but James Madison, we're just going to go something different. James Madison, a really fun year. They move on. Mississippi State and Wake Forest. Sam Hartman obviously transferred to Notre Dame in the offseason, but I think that he would be a really fun player to see against Mississippi State. Now, Mississippi State has Will Rogers. I think an SEC versus an ACC matchup. Again, I'm going to go with an upset here. I think that Wake Forest offense is too much for Mississippi State to handle. Could see it going either way if these two teams matched up. Washington and Washington State. Washington is just too good for Washington State in this one. Fresno State, a team that can make a deep run in these playoffs, depending on who they match up against. They see Ole Miss. Now, Ole Miss is a team that is super dangerous as an SEC team. But with Jake Haener running the show, I think that Fresno State is going to get the nod here. Then finally, the final matchup, Tennessee and SMU, the 215. And you're looking at two teams that can play some really good offense. Tennessee is able to beat a team like Alabama this year, and that is a reason why they are going to win this game because SMU just doesn't have the firepower that Tennessee does. To the second round of the South region, and then we'll move on to another region here. Georgia is going to be a tough matchup for anybody, and especially a team like Purdue who struggled against Michigan. I don't really see Purdue coming out on top with this one, so we're giving the Georgia Bulldogs the win there. LSU against the Cinderella story so far in James Madison. LSU was a really strong team towards the end of the year. Maybe not the beginning of the year. If this was the beginning of the year, you might put James Madison going forward. But in this case, we're going kind of off the end of the year and what a team would look like at the end of the year. LSU is going to move forward. Wake Forest and Washington, that's a game that I would be really excited to watch. I think that would be super entertaining. Two high-powered offenses. Washington was playing really strong towards the end of the year against, and the end of the year is going to play a big role in these games, in these matchups. And for that reason, Washington is going to win this game. And then the final matchup, Fresno State, again, a really fun team, a team that I think surprised a lot of people last year in certain matchups. And I think that they were tougher than a lot of people expected, but Tennessee just has too much firepower. Even with Joe Milton running the show, you're looking at a team that can be really explosive. Now, maybe towards the end of the year with Tennessee slowing down a little bit because Hendon Hooker gets hurt, I don't know if that changes things. I'm going to give Tennessee the benefit of the doubt here, and I think that they're going to advance past Fresno State. Next, we head down to the East region, and this one is super packed with talent. Ohio State is the number one seed here, taking on the Wisconsin Badgers. Last year, Wisconsin struggled mightily at times. The rushing attack wasn't as potent as it once was, and the passing attack obviously still struggled. Ohio State with CJ Stroud and Marvin Harrison Jr. are going to advance there. Iowa and Texas Tech. Texas Tech is a team that's going to be really fun to watch in 2023 under Joey McGuire, and Iowa was pretty bad offensively and pretty good defensively. So when you're looking at who's going to win this matchup, I think it's pretty obvious in my opinion. I think you're looking at a Texas Tech team that is really tough to beat, and for that reason, they are going to move on. UTSA and Oklahoma State. This would be an intriguing matchup. The tough part with Oklahoma State towards the end of the season, they weren't quite the same team. And UTSA was a team on a mission. And for that reason, UTSA is going to move on with a win there. Now, the beauty of this bracket here is that teams were playing different towards the end of the year. So if some teams played poorly, like a team Florida State against LSU, then you're looking at the beginning of the year as a different team almost than at the end of the year. Florida State at the end of the year, one of the hottest teams in college football. They play a Florida team that has Anthony Richardson, but for the most part, that's pretty much it. So you're looking at a Florida State team that's going to advance despite playing their rival. South Carolina and South Alabama. South Alabama, really fun story, really exciting offense. They're going to be really exciting again in 2023, but South Carolina just has too much firepower, so they move on there. Kansas State and Kansas. This one would be extremely intriguing, both as a basketball game and as a football game. Towards the end of the year, Kansas really cooled off. Kansas State was playing really strong, actually won the Big 12 over TCU, who played for a national championship. So, for that reason, Kansas State is going to move on. That might be a different story at the end of next year. Then you look at North Carolina and Air Force. North Carolina as a 7 seed, super underrated team. Air Force as a 10 seed, super underrated team. Air Force is really tough. I don't know if North Carolina has the discipline to stop a team like that, but I also don't know if Air Force has enough firepower to slow down Drake May in that offense. So North Carolina is going to advance for that reason. Utah is the 2 seed playing against a stingy Ohio team, a team that not many expected to be near the top of the MAC conference. Utah is just too solid of a team, and I don't think that an upset happens there. Sticking in the East, we have Ohio State and Texas Tech. Honestly, I think this game has the potential to be close, but I think in the end, Ohio State just has too much firepower with CJ Stroud and Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Ibuka, even the running backs, Mayan Williams, if he was healthy, if Trayvon Henderson was healthy. I mean, they gave Georgia a run for their money, so I don't see why a Texas Tech team could hang around with them. Again, beginning of the year, probably a different story. Towards the end of the year, Ohio State's probably winning this one. UTSA and Florida State. This would be an extremely intriguing matchup. But again, the Seminoles were one of the hottest teams in college football heading into the end of the year, and they're going to be a really popular pick in 2023. And I think that reason alone and the talent that they have, UTSA just can't compete with that. South Carolina and Kansas State. Now, South Carolina, again, for the second year in a row, playing really strong towards the end of the year. Kansas State was doing the same. And Kansas State at times gave Alabama some fits before obviously Alabama took control of that game. I'm going to go with Kansas State strictly for that reason, and that their ability to make big plays and be a little bit more disciplined from last year, this is going to get them to the next round. Then North Carolina and Utah. Utah is one of those teams that they were able to beat a team like USC twice, and that is really exciting for a group that is facing a high-powered offense. And North Carolina is really, really good. They had an experienced defense. Now, if Utah could get the ball rolling against that defense, which isn't unheard of, then they probably win this game. Just to be a little bit different, it might be fun to put North Carolina in to the next round. Again, we're not seeing a ton of upsets right now. So I think that just to switch things up, we're actually going to go with North Carolina just for fun. Again, Utah is a really talented team, a really tough team to beat, but we're going to go with North Carolina in this game. Next, we head up to the Midwest region. TCU is that number one overall seed, a really tough division, a really tough part of the bracket. If you ask my opinion, Alabama sits at the bottom, Texas is at the bottom, Tulane is in there, Oregon is in there, and this one's going to be really interesting, a really exciting part of the bracket. TCU and Auburn, I don't think there's much of a question. TCU played a lot of close games. Auburn was just really poor team going into the end of the year, so I don't think that there's much concern there. Illinois and Duke. Illinois was one of those teams that really surprised a lot of people, really played elite defense. And that's a team that, if you're looking at someone to make a strong run, that Illinois team could be someone we keep an eye on later in the bracket. Troy and Baylor. Troy was one of the best G5 teams that we've seen this year. A really, really good defense, one that can shut down nearly anybody. That is going to get them to the next round here. Oregon and Coastal Carolina. Now, if this was Coastal Carolina last year or 2 years ago, then I think that they have a better chance of winning this game. Oregon was just too good towards the end of the year. Bo Nix was playing really well, and that's going to get them to the next round. Pitt and Cincinnati, a game that probably would put a lot of people to sleep, to be completely honest. Pitt, here's the deal. Pitt was an okay team. I think that they had some really exciting times, some really exciting moments, including that beginning game against West Virginia. But overall, I think that the offense didn't exactly have the firepower that they once had, especially the loss of Jordan Addison hurt a lot. So Cincinnati is going to get that win. Luke Fickell just knows how to win big games, so they're going to move on. Tulane and Syracuse, not really a question here. Tulane with that big win in the Cotton Bowl over USC, and we saw a lot of exciting teams play this year. Tulane was definitely one of them. They are going to move on. Texas and Kentucky. Kentucky does not have the firepower. I'm sorry if you're a Will Levis lover, but he does not have enough by himself to be able to move on. Texas is going to win this game. Alabama and Houston, if this was a Houston team of the past, maybe, but Alabama is going to wipe the floor with them. So this next round is interesting because when you look at March Madness, there's always the opportunity for weird upsets that happen. And this first matchup, TCU and Illinois, is one of those games that could produce one of those upsets. So when you're looking at what could be, this is a matchup that you could see an upset happening. You look at what Illinois was able to do last year, their defense kept them in games, and they could do maybe just enough. And again, anything can happen. And TCU is playing really, really well towards the end of the year. But again, we saw some hiccups in those games. So again, things happen. And because of that reason, Illinois is going to win this game. We're going to move them on to the next round just for fun. And you see what happens with the next round of matchups. TCU, again, could blow them out of the water, but Illinois' defense had a number of NFL draft picks and a number of future NFL draft picks that could slow an offense like TCU's down. We will go forward with Illinois, probably a really controversial pick, but that's just what we're going to go with to switch things up. Troy and Oregon, I think Oregon's offense was pretty good, and Troy's defense was pretty good as well. And you're having two of those going against each other. What's going to happen? I'm not really sure how this would go in real life. Troy is a really fun team to watch. Oregon is just too talented, though, to me to be able to withstand get upset. So we're going to move them on. Cincinnati and Tulane, an AAC matchup. Tulane, the winners of the AAC, a team that, again, really fun to watch towards the end of the year. Cincinnati kind of slowed down towards the end of the year. So Tulane is going to win the game. Texas and Alabama, a rematch of the early season matchup that we saw. A game that really changed both of these teams' trajectories. If Quinn Ewers doesn't get hurt, does Texas win that game? If Alabama has certain things go their way, are they a different team? So this is two teams that are very different towards the end of the year. Texas obviously loses to Washington in their bowl game. Alabama beats Kansas State towards the end of the year. Alabama's playing really, really well. I want to say that Texas would have a chance of winning this game, but this is an Alabama team that is really, really good. And maybe it's different towards the end of the year. I don't know for sure, but I think that you're looking at Alabama team that again is really tough to beat. And even if you play them twice, it's going to be tough to slow them down. The final region of this bracket has Michigan as the one seed. Again, you can see it's pretty obvious the four playoff teams are the one seeds. Everything else went by the Athletics final ranking of all 131 teams. Just pick the top 64, rank them 1 to 64 and whatnot. So Michigan and Missouri, no real debate here. Michigan is going to move on there. Boise State and UCF, a game that we will see again in 2023. Two teams that are pretty solid at the G5 level. Last year, UCF is moving on to the Big 12. Boise State playing pretty well towards the end of the year. UCF not so much. And I'm going to give Boise State the win just because of what I saw towards the end of the year. Notre Dame playing Oklahoma, an all-time class between two teams that are regulars in the national conversation, two teams that went in different directions. I think Oklahoma started a little bit strong and died off towards the end of the year. Notre Dame struggled at first, but really figured things out towards the end of the season. Oklahoma, I'm really excited to see what they can do in 2023, but nothing is going to happen too drastic for them. I think that they're going to take some steps forward. This is a game I think that they can win. I don't think Notre Dame has the firepower to keep up with what we saw from Oklahoma. And I think that even with their struggles, Oklahoma is still a really solid team. Notre Dame obviously has some talent of their own. We're going to go with the upset here, Oklahoma over Notre Dame. Clemson and BYU. This is not the BYU team that we once saw. Clemson, despite their struggles, is still extremely talented, extremely good. They are going to get the win here. UCLA and Western Kentucky. Now, this is a game that could score, you could see both teams score 60 points. Neither defense was particularly elite, and both offenses could play at a high level. Now, UCLA is probably going to win this game unless they can't figure out a way to score points against Western Kentucky's defense. I don't think that'll be a problem, so UCLA will move on. USC and Arkansas. Now, this is an interesting matchup because Arkansas is a team that has potential to be really good. They have the potential to pull off an upset, but beating Caleb Williams isn't easy. Now, ask Tulane how much fun it was to play against USC's defense. That's the one thing that's going to hurt USC in this matchup is they're going to have a tough time being able to slow down this Arkansas offense. Kendall Browse is still technically the coordinator in this scenario, so that's going to be tough to see for a USC fan. And even though they have a struggling defense, USC is going to win this game to play UCLA in the next round. NC State and Louisville, one of those games that, I mean, it honestly doesn't really matter. I think that NC State was playing decent towards the end of the year. Louisville, not so much. And I think that their struggles against Cincinnati in the bowl game were tough to watch. And obviously now there are some changes. NC State is going to move on because of that. Just a more experienced team, a more level-headed team. Now, Penn State and ECU. This is a really interesting matchup because ECU was playing really strong towards the end of the year. I think that this one won't be an upset. Penn State will move on, but I think this one would be closer than people expected. Now, in the next round, Michigan and Boise State. Boise State not good enough to beat a team like Michigan. Oklahoma and Clemson. This one is where things get interesting because Oklahoma is a team that can score a ton of points, and they face a Clemson team that's really good defensively but had its struggles offensively. And this is a kind of bracket where we're going to apply some March Madness chaos to it, where certain things need to happen. And a team that struggles offensively sometimes doesn't win games in tournaments like this. Now, again, this is hypothetical, so this is never going to happen in terms of a bracket, but this is where the fun begins. A team like Oklahoma that can score points, if they find a way to break through Clemson's defense and Clemson continues to not be able to figure things out, a team like Oklahoma is going to move forward, and that is exactly what happens here. UCLA and USC. Now, when you're looking at these two teams, natural rivalry, when you saw both of them at the end of the year, kind of different teams, but still two teams that are playing at a decent level. You're looking at two quarterbacks in Dorian Thompson Robinson and Caleb Williams that are playing extremely well towards the end of the year. You're looking at two quarterbacks that, again, lead their teams in different ways. And obviously, Caleb wins the Heisman Trophy. This is an offense that's going to be tough to stop. And we mentioned that UCLA barely gets by a team like Western Kentucky. USC is the team that barely beat UCLA this past year, 48-45. And I think that this one would be close. I think that you're looking at two teams that would play another close game. And you're going to get a USC team that is just going to hang on just enough. I think that they're just slightly better still, especially towards the end of the year. So they get the win here. NC State and Penn State, not much really here to debate. Penn State played really strong towards the end of the year, a team that's going to be really fun to watch in 2023. They move on as well. We go back to the South region. Georgia and LSU face off in what could be a more entertaining matchup at the end of the year than it would have been at the beginning of the year. If Jane Daniels is playing really well, then maybe this game is different. However, according to What If Sports, Georgia absolutely dominates this one 41-0. On the bottom side of this region, Washington and Tennessee play, and that one has the potential to be really good as well. However, Tennessee pulls away with a 37-16 win to move on to the Elite Eight. Georgia and Tennessee will match up later. Oregon facing Illinois, an Illinois team that pulled off the upset of TCU earlier. Oregon ends that Cinderella run with a win there. Then you have Alabama and Tulane against the top seed gets the home game for this game. After this, it'll be neutral site games. Alabama and Tulane, a 44-31 absolute thriller. Tulane's magical season comes to an end. thanks to the Crimson Tide. Now we head down to the West region where Oklahoma is trying to keep their run going. They face off against a Michigan team that is the number one seed, and a 28-27 win for the Oklahoma Sooners keeps them alive. And these are some of the games that make it really exciting. These are some of the games that would be really shocking, and that, obviously this is hypothetical, so we're going to allow it to happen. Then you have Penn State and USC. Now this was a surprising one where you see a team like Penn State, who again probably is going to be better without Sean Clifford running the show, but in here they are having a good season, they are having a good tournament, and they pull off the win against USC. They win 36-29 to move on to the Elite Eight. Now, the Ohio State Florida State matchup has the potential to be an incredible matchup, and that proved to be the case. Florida State wins an absolute barn burner 50-35 to move on to the Elite Eight. Going down to the bottom side of the bracket, Kansas State, North Carolina, another game that has potential to be really exciting. Again, these are the kinds of games that make expansion exciting. Now, it's not going to be 64 teams, but these are the kinds of games that could be exciting. Now, people are going to talk about, well, the matchups might be the same at the championship game. That's just fine. I'm here for the entertainment of what makes a bracket exciting. And these are the kinds of games that do that. Kansas State wins this one 45-28 to move on. Heading back up to the South bracket, Tennessee and Georgia square off. A game that went Georgia's way by a comfortable margin is different this time. Tennessee pulls off the win 29-20 to move on to the Final Four. Big win for the Volunteers here. Midwest region, we have Oregon and Alabama. Now, this is a game that will, again, another one that's good at the end of the year, probably not so much at the beginning of the year, as Oregon got stomped by Georgia. They play Alabama and they come out with a win 41-24 to move on. A 4 seed moving on. We have a 2 seed and a 4 seed now in the Final Four. Heading down to the bottom, we have the Cinderella in Oklahoma trying to keep their run alive against Penn State. Penn State puts an absolute stop to that, 41-34. Really close game and a really exciting game. Penn State moves on to the Final Four. And then we head over to the East region, and you're looking at a Florida State team that, again, this is not really surprising. You're looking at a Florida State team that was really fun to watch towards the end of the year, and they continue that run with a 41-27 win over Kansas State to get to the Final Four. Oregon and Penn State, a matchup that is, again, if you're headed in a bowl game, really exciting. And both teams are playing well towards the end of the year. Oregon continues their run 44-23. When you flip over to the other side of the bracket, Florida State and Tennessee, two teams that would be fun to watch once again. Mike Norvell against Josh Heupel, a former AAC competition. We've seen them play before, and this one would be exciting. I don't know how you wouldn't watch Tennessee and Florida State playing a college football playoff. And when expansion happens, this is something that we could get. And I think that would be really exciting. Florida State wins this one 35-21 to move on to the national championship game against the Oregon Ducks. And this is the kind of game that you want for a national championship. 43-42, Florida State wins this hypothetical college football March Madness, emphasis on the madness, obviously. This is what's really exciting. I think that this has the potential to be a really exciting time when you're looking at expansion with a 12-team playoff. I think that there's potential at the beginning to have really exciting games. You can still get the best teams, and that's the beauty of March Madness. And we see these upsets, we see these exciting things happen, and now you see it in a bracket for college football. Really exciting. Not sure if will ever happen in our lifetime outside of video games or something like this, but still really fun exercise to see what would happen if 64 teams were in the college football playoff.